Wildfire challenges us somewhere every day. Our departments and crews are responding to more fires with greater complexity, our communities are experiencing larger and more destructive fires, and associated losses continue to rise. In this podcast, we'll explore all of this with the people who are experiencing wildfires firsthand. We'll talk about leadership and technology on the front lines, hear stories about that which responders are experiencing on the ground. We'll talk to the people in our communities that are creating innovative solutions, and we'll expose heroes doing great things before, during, and after these fires. We welcome you to Wildfire Chronicles, Heroism Beyond the Flames. Kevin and I were happy to be here with Bob Horton. You are the branch chief of wildfire and policy for the U.S. Fire Administration. Did I get that right?
That is correct. Yes.
That's a long title.
It is. Yeah.
I'm actually surprised this morning I got it right. We're happy you're here. Thank you for being here with us.
That's a pleasure to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you've now been ushered into this big position?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. It is a pleasure to be here. I have a bit of a circuitous route to get into the wildfire space. I didn't grow up in a wildfire environment. I grew up I was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada. I grew up in the fire service for the city of Las Vegas. We maybe burned a tumbleweed from time to time. That was it. Wildfire was something we saw on the news. But I grew up passionate about public policy. And that passion came from being an inner city response paramedic in Las Vegas. And my station was First Due, the old Station 6 Bad Dogs. We were
shout out there.
Shout out to the Bad Dogs. Yeah, we were First Due to the state and county mental health institution, and we were running frequent calls to these folks who were in acute mental health crisis. And I watched a system that was broken, and I said, man, we have to be able to do better, right? We have to be able to do better for this community. And so I went to school and I studied public administration. I've studied public policy for a lot of years and really engaged in these spaces where we can make a difference in how these systems work to make it better for people, make it better for communities. So that's my kind of passion in the public policy domain. And then when it was time to leave Las Vegas, it was 2017. And it was time to leave. I was looking at closer to family. My parents, my brother and his wife lived in coastal Oregon in the Pacific Northwest. My wife had gone to college in Vancouver, Washington. So she was familiar with Portland and the Pacific Northwest. And so she was eager to, excited to support a move that direction. We were looking for work. And I landed as the fire chief in Jackson County Fire District 3. Sat across the room from a board of directors who asked the same question. What experience do you have with wildfire? I have no experience with wildfire, board. Don't bring that expertise. Don't want to try to pretend like I have that expertise. Yeah. They were looking for a leader to help evolve the EMS system at the time. Said, we have wildfire experts here, and we're confident you're capable of learning. We're confident you can learn. And learning I did, because I quickly was thrust into extreme wildfire risk in the Southern Oregon region. I was engaged in the State Chiefs Association, actively including a role in some really influential legislation that we had across Oregon. The Oregon State Fire Marshal's office had lived in the public safety and the state police agency. We were able to get them out into their own, equivalent of a cabinet level position that reports to the governor. We had an omnibus wildfire bill, which was the greatest investment in spending in wildfire risk reduction and suppression efforts, mitigation work in the state, in the state's history. And so I just got a chance to be at the table affecting policy as it pertains to wildfire in short order. So, 7 years, fast forward 7 years later, I had an outside view on this wildfire challenge. I asked a lot of questions. Why do we do it this way? How come, how do we get along with, there's forestry and the Forest Service and the local agencies, and how does all of this work together? Where are there inefficiencies? Where can we make changes to make this better? Because it's just, it's clear that this problem's getting worse and we can't just keep doing the same thing. So, fast forward from that, I had left the fire chief position in early 2023, was doing some policy and programmatic work with the Western Fire Chiefs Association, where I had served on their board of directors for a period of time. And you can't help but find yourself, especially if you're out west, but really if you're working on issues that are affecting communities, affecting firefighters, you're talking about wildfire. So I found myself navigated into the insurance conversation, into the technology conversation about wildfire. And then this opportunity came about to work for the U.S. Fire Administration. And my wife gave it a lot of thought because it took me from Oregon and into Washington, D.C. And as a bit of a policy wonk, both academically and professionally, the idea to be able to go into be in the in the soup of Washington, D.C. It was like a bucket list thing for me. Like I'd love to have done a stint in D.C. And so when opportunity lines up with preparation, it's pretty exciting. So that's how I found myself here in U.S. Fire Administration.
So that's a cool story. And I go all the way back to the very beginning of your story. And I'll paraphrase here, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like you cut your policy teeth in a very routine thing, public health. Right? You were saying, as an EMS paramedic, you were watching systemic burdens, and you said, I can make a difference with that by policy.
Yes.
That really isn't any different than what's happening in the wildfire space.
Yes.
That's great. Okay, so now you're in this position with U.S. Fire Administration after this, pretty cool route. That's, I think, one of the first times Kevin and I have heard this. You had your focus on policy from the very beginning, which seems totally rational where you've ended up.
Right.
How is this new job? I know you're only months into it, and we don't expect you to say bad by any means. Oh, it's horrible, it's bad. I'm sure you're going to say it's excellent, but what are you seeing is on the horizon for this position?
I think the opportunity has been great, and I've been in for about 5 to 6 weeks. And just to be transparent with the audience, there's a lot of onboarding and orientation to work for the federal government. So the first several weeks is spent learning processes and policies and these kinds of things and relationships. And I'm still in like remedial acronym training, because anyone who's spoken to somebody in the feds, like everything's about some kind of acronym. Yeah. And I have to take notes and ask Alea, what does that mean? Who is that agency? What do they do? How does this interface? But the job is fantastic. The willingness and acceptance of expertise around the wildfire domain in areas who find themselves, like our team over at FEMA, who does mitigation work, largely it didn't come from a wildfire environment, experts in flood work and climate adaptation, but wildfire a little bit different. And so they've been very welcoming to say, oh, we have somebody who comes from a bit of a wildfire background, they can help us. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I think is just incredibly amazing is how passionate people who are working in that arena, who are working on this problem, really are. Mm-hmm. But the elephant in the room, and we were talking a little bit about before the show about it, is what happens in a presidential transition like we're in right now. Yeah. And I don't know the answer to that. I said, but it is palpable around the environment that change is coming. What does that look like? Nobody really knows. And so I sort of think you embrace the uncertainty. They taught us in this orientation about being FEMA flexible the entire time.
Here you go.
Some positions, some positions are appointees and they'll move on, and other, career civil service folks will stay and embrace the agenda and move it forward and take on this transition. So I feel grateful that I was able to onboard and be able to spend the time learning where we're at now pre-election, when there was sort of what was going to happen next was just something the pundits talked about on the news all the time. Mm-hmm. But we were able to get in and sort of get to work and build some of these relationships. And my role is to sort of carry forward on the work that we have been doing in spite of these transitions that are occurring in the federal government. Yeah,
and I know we want to talk, at least I want to talk some about that work, because Dr. Lori Moore Merrill has brought in some great energy to this space, and we'll get to that in a second. But again, pointing out sort of your route here, you talked about going to Jackson County, was it? Jackson
That's right, yes.
And sitting across from a board of interviewers and saying, I don't know about this space, but I'm a quick learner. And now here you are again, right? And you've got some great knowledge in wildland. You have none in what we do during this presidential transition, but it seems like you're the perfect person to help with this bridge, right?
Well, I appreciate
That's great.
Yeah, it's nice to have an outside view and to not be like fixed into the way certain things go. And I want to add, because you brought that back up, that the board president who hired me to be a fire chief and was supportive of me, that entire board was supportive of me and our work the entire time I was the fire chief. But the grin he has from ear to ear, having been across that table from a guy who otherwise said he'd never experienced wildfire in his life, to be in this top space at the national level influencing public policy. I think
he's got to feel pretty good.
Pretty excited for him.
Check.
Him in that team, knowing the journey that he and I and the entire board had gone on together, becoming active in this wildfire space.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Pretty cool to see, and I'm sure they're like parents for you. Like, we did it.
Yeah, they were proud. Yeah.
Well, that's really cool, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool transition. I'm glad you're there to help them bridge through this transition as well.
Yeah.
So getting to the platform that Dr. Lori has created, the One Voice, is that what the name of it was?
Fire Service One
Fire
Voice.
Service
That's
One
correct.
Voice. Tell us about that. How does that apply to the work you're doing? And maybe even how is that going to get beyond this transition? Is this something that might even continue into the next administration and beyond?
Sure.
What do you think?
Well, we certainly hope so.
Yeah.
And there'd be no reason to indicate that One Voice would not continue to be the mantra. I find it to be anchored into the attitudes and behaviors of all of these collaborations. That's what it is. Fire Service One Voice is about building a collaboration that withstands time, withstands people. And when you have so many efforts, and there are so many efforts, when you have an issue as complex as wildfire, you have many agencies all doing good work, but if they're not rowing at the same pace, you're not going to move forward. And so what our great fire administrator, Dr. Moore Merrill, has done is she brought all of those efforts together in a shared environment on a shared strategy. How are we going to approach this and other challenges across the fire service, not just wildfire. Wildfire is a big piece of it, but other health and safety of firefighters, sustainable funding for our fire departments locally, the voice itself around the entire local fire agencies. The U.S. Fire Administration is the voice for local fire agencies at the federal level. We don't have our own federal firefighters that are urban city firefighters, right? That Forest Service does for wildland firefighters. We become the voice for all the local fire agencies across the country. And so what she did was bring these teams together, said, let's agree, build consensus around a shared vision and movement going forward. And let's all agree that this is the voice. And when we leave this room, we speak with the one voice. And I think it's incredibly powerful. And she used the summit, the Fire Administration Summit, as the venue for checking in. What is our progress? How are our work groups doing? What else do we need? And a testament by not only having the President of the United States engage in communication with that group, but to have the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. I'm learning how very challenging it is to get on the Secretary of Homeland Security's calendar. And so for him, during the middle of disasters, this last summit that I was at, to be able to carve time to come in and speak to the fire service and join in the One Voice, I think is a testament to her leadership for sure.
And does the One Voice, you had said it's the voice of local fire service and so many of these things. Through time, has it also pulled in some of these other federal partners? Because certainly in the wildland space, when you're looking at community fire adaptation, you've got the host of federal agencies that us local fire, I'm sure in Oregon, you dealt with the Forest Service and BLM, and then there's state agencies. Is it really trying to capture those efforts and get everybody aligned in wildland issues as well? Was that part of the campaign?
It is. And our audience won't be surprised, but be proud to know that, our U.S. Fire Administrator, if someone is somewhere in Washington, D.C. talking about wildfire, she's going to find herself into that room and is going to be communicating about the effort the U.S. Fire Administration and the Fire Service has around this space. You're looking at generations of a conversation that wildfire was purely a land management problem. And so, we saw this in Oregon when a wildfire hit Oregon, elected leaders and, senior bureaucrats would turn to the Department of Forestry and say, this is a wildfire. This is you. And didn't hear the voice of local fire agencies as part of that. Now, you realize anytime you start to have this kind of this or that conversation, it becomes a bit of this dichotomous argument, the zero sum, like, well, if there's X amount of funding for this, you start to see tension between a land management problem or a suppression or local community, problem. And so navigating that conversation around risk, that's a strategy that I take. So really, we're all talking about risk here. Let's focus in on what the risk is and the efforts to reduce said risk to the community and to the firefighters. Like this isn't about, is it more of a your problem or more of an our problem? It's collective our problem. And One Voice helps bring that forward, is to say, well, it's about One Voice. It's about a shared interest in resolving this problem. It isn't about you said agency one or two or three, or even us as the Fire Administration. It's what energy, what resources, time, money, effort can we bring to this problem collectively? Because if we don't do that, then we're just really not going to make progress on this, the complexity of this wildfire problem.
I don't know that it's funny, but it's real. Those of us who get buried in the bureaucracy, like you've described your route, I know I have. We sometimes miss the opportunity to find that one voice because we're buried in our patterns and our acronyms. I would imagine, Kevin, somebody looking from, you're on the periphery, you're not in the operation. You look at us and you go, how can you not have one voice, right? Makes total sense.
I mean, one of the big things I've admired a lot of Dr. Laurie is this whole One Voice initiative and looking at all the .gov, .org, .edu partners that we've now created this bridge for, where we are all kind of singing off the same sheet of music, which is exciting. And you've seen it here at TSI with all these different groups coming together, and it's not just like our agenda or this initiative. It's our initiative, and I think I like how you phrase that. It's not. It also kind of ties into not only our initiative but our problem, and I think that ties into the next question I kind of want to ask you too, in terms of like how wildfire isn't just like a thing that happens in like the remote woods in northern Canada or northern Montana or wherever. It's actually something that's facing the entire country, and with it kind of being our problem and touching all different stakeholders in the fire service, all different stakeholders around the country. Thoughts on the kind of the narrative, and also, I guess, how we need to continue to address the fact that wildfire is a global problem, but there's also things we can do from a prevention standpoint. There's better things we can do from local response standpoint. Anything that you've seen like been like a success story you can point to around that, or any kind of insights around that?
I appreciate that question. And I want to share by telling a little bit of a story that was a bit of an eye-opener right for me, is this lived experience I had. It wasn't my fire district. There's several fire districts in and around the area, Southern Oregon, where I lived and worked. But I was elected by my peers to be the fire defense board chief for our county. And this is the mobilization of resources in Oregon. The state fire marshal's office manages resources across the state when there's a conflagration request that's stamped by the governor, and now a local community is overwhelmed as a result of a fire, and there's a coordination point between the state emergency resources from the Oregon State Fire Marshal, separate from the forestry piece. So this is how we mobilize task forces and strike teams from local government to come support others. And my job was this coordination of resources. And this is the Labor Day fires of 2020 in Oregon, where we had at any time 7 to 11 conflagration fires going on at the same. Every one of them newsworthy, every one of them headline-worthy fires. We had all of them going on at one time, and in our county, we were made aware ahead of time that we have strong weather conditions, and more likely than not, no help was going to be coming. And as a local community, we emergency recalled every off-duty firefighter. This is before a fire ever started. Just on risk and weather predictions alone, we emergency recalled every firefighter in the valley that was able to come back. We had about a 95% compliance rate across the county of folks who came into work. The 5% that didn't were on vacation and ended up coming back after this fire had started. And the point of telling this story is this wildfire took 2,500 homes and structures in Southern Oregon. It impacted our low socioeconomic area. I mean, generational businesses. And it's a very personal touch when you have a chance to when you see that, not have a chance. Nobody wants that. But when it's forced upon you. And the point of this story is not a square inch of that was in wildlands. It wasn't in a forest. It wasn't a forest fire that merged into a community. And we have this historical lens on this problem as fires are starting in the forest and they're going to emerge upon a community. And a lot of what we do has an assumption of that. A lot of our programs have this sort of assumption of the fire is going to emerge to the community. How do we evacuate for that? How do we, build suppression around that, and so on and so forth. And we're seeing, it was Alameda in Oregon, it was Lahaina in Hawaii, right? California. We're seeing these stories more and more now, and I suspect we will continue until we see major changes occurring where these are urban conflagrations, structure to structure fires from the get-go, like these fast-moving, wind-driven, high-risk fires. So the question, so now I'm on the phone just weeks ago with our friends from New York, fire department in New York, saying we're experiencing something we've never seen before. When I moved to Oregon and my firefighters are telling me this, I've been wildland firefighting for 20 years, 25 years. I've never seen anything like this before when we send them on various deployments areas. And these are things that I pay attention to because I'd never fought a wildland fire in my life. But the people who have keep saying this is different. There is something different about what we're experiencing now. And the structure to structure urban conflagrations, the type of fires that we're experiencing. So Immensely different. I think, like my point, Kevin, I think I forgot the question by now because I've been rambling so long. But what I'm gleaning is, fire, and I say this in the messages when I get a chance to travel to other leaders who say, well, wildfire's not, we don't have a wildfire. Yes, you do. Like you do. If wildfire is coming to a town near you, because of this changing environment we're facing, and you're blessed if you haven't had that experience yet. But I imagine you have risk you may or may not be looking at. These fire chiefs are positioned to do something about it better than a lot of us who are now trying to catch up from sort of decades of not engaging this type of work. So remind me your question. Make sure I answered that right.
I mean, you answered it perfectly. I'm just sitting here with my popcorn on the side enjoying this ride. But I like the phrase you said, never seen anything like this before. I feel like that's been a common phrase I've heard more and more of, like, oh, this is a 100-year storm, or never seen anything like this before. And it's almost, you hear it so often now that's like sounds cliche. I mean, is it a combination of the challenge of extreme weather events, the population growth, to inevitable doom? I don't know. But of course, I want to look at the world glass half full. So I don't want to just think that, hey, everything, we're going down. But with this whole kind of continued rise of these once in a million type events, how does that tie into how we're approaching getting ready to handle it from a public safety perspective?
Yeah, I think an indicator when we've never seen it like this before, and you hear that message consistently, that means what we've been doing probably isn't going to be good enough, or what we need to change our lens and our approach on this. So it's the things that you had said. It's this evolving climate experience that we're having. It's continuing to develop in the interface. I can't remember offhand the recent statistics, but it was more than a third of new development occurring across the United States is in an interface area. And this is, to be expected. I mean, we have a housing shortage issue, generally across the country. You talk to local leaders, we have a problem with affordable housing. We need more development. And in many of these communities, the only way to go is out, right? It's out to develop in these areas of the interface. That's where there is land available to develop. So you have this fire safety, community safety issue at tension with this development interest that local, governors and mayors and so forth have. Like, we need to develop more. What gets lost sometimes is, okay, if we build, let's assume for a second we will build. How do we build safely? Like, how do we build smarter in these communities? And I'll just share just a local example, because I found it quite disturbing. And our legislature in Oregon, on the backside of these fires I was just talking about, 2,500 homes in Jackson County, but more so across the rest of our state. And our legislature allowed these developers to build back at an old standard. It was the 2000 standard. In fact, the legislation they were pushing was back to the original code of construction of that structure. If it was built in 1960, they're saying we should be able to build it back to the same code that it was when it was originally constructed, which is egregious. And I'll call it the compromise. I'm using air quotes because there was certainly no compromise of the fire service in our interests in there. But they allowed these folks to build back at the 2000 standards rather than the 2020 or 2023, I think, codes, including the WUI code. So here we go, rebuilding in a high-risk interface with lesser standards than what we understand from the science and technology of today. We can build safer and smarter. There's some amazing work going on right now on fire pathway and on risk modeling and understanding, because our fire behavioralists have done an extraordinary job of the vegetation to vegetation fire spreads. I think we have great modeling that understands that. But maybe not so much as the vegetation to structure and structure to structure conflagration spreads. And that work is going on now. So I'm very confident we're going to have better models that are going to help inform where we can be most strategic in our work. I mean, we push this narrative to our communities of defensible space, it makes sense. Like, we understand it as industry insiders, but those on the outside hear that and think, cut down all my trees. Like, I have to live in a institutionalized looking compound with no trees. Like, well, no, that's not true, right? No, you can still have trees. You just got to manage your vegetation in a way that reduces this risk. So we have to change the story around what we're asking of communities and have really good demonstrations, I feel, of this is a fire safe design, and that doesn't look bad. Like, give people an image of what their properties or structures could look like. But yes, as we continue to develop, we have to do so as safely as we possibly can with what we know today, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, when you think of future or technologic change, advancement, which I'd imagine is all in your interest in your platform as you into the show, to Kevin's question, it seems like a lot of the progress you just talked about is not, a sharper shovel or a vehicle that can get higher, an aircraft that can fly longer. You're talking about changes in understanding how fire moves, changes in understand how fire comes in and out of communities and how we build and how we model things and how we use and collect data, et cetera, et cetera. Is that a pretty safe thing to say, that a lot of the advancement technology and future, I guess, in technology is happening outside of a suppression space and maybe more in community fire adaptation? That kind of thing, right?
We will have scarce resources to this problem in perpetuity. I mean, we cannot produce enough firefighters and firefighting equipment and shovels and even aircraft to solve the problem is solved. We cannot possibly do that, even assuming there was all the money in the world. So sure, there's investments that are important. And I don't think the message is that isn't important. It's, what can we do ahead of the fire? Wildfire is such a unique peril, and we have this tension between investment in suppression work, operational work, as seemingly sometimes at odds, like seen as a trade-off to mitigation work, which I think is a problem. Those shouldn't be seen as a trade-off. It's yes and, it's this and, versus other perils such as earthquakes. Like when you look at the investment in mitigating earthquakes, it's structures. It's how do we build and where do we build? Floods. How do we build? Where do we build? Hurricanes. Same, right? When you end up in wildfire, it's, we could just fight the fire. And if we could just have more energy putting into fighting the fire, or even identifying it when it's small and extinguishing it. And that's energy that you're starting to see or have seen from our political leaders is, fight all fires, get them when they're small, this kind of thing. And that behavior, that attitude is in part what's put us where we're at here, where we have all these, lush, full forests when we haven't allowed the natural ecosystem of fire to help manage that risk, because we now are so much better at extinguishing in some of these cases. So the answer is absolutely the modeling and understanding how to be efficient with the scarce resources that we have. Because if we have only $1 to invest in prevention, where does it make the most sense? And we used to just sort of say, let's just kind of do it all. And if we just sort of clear cut a path around a community or something like this that creates some sort of barrier, we're better off. And that's not entirely true either. But our level of modeling is advanced to a sophistication, and we're getting there to where we can say it's actually, this is the pathway that enters into the community. And if we can reduce risk at this pathway, we get this much in terms of return on investment. I'm pointing my hand high for those that are just listening.
It went up even higher.
It went up even higher. Yeah, we did this little bit of investment. We got this much return on investment versus just a broad stroke of saying, let's put some money into reducing a little bit of the trees and here we go. So the technology is helping inform the decision making from a mitigation standpoint. I mean, defensible space by the nature of its terminology is how do we slow the spread and the contagion of wildfire in such a way that suppression teams can manage it that way. I mean, it isn't stopping the fire outright. It's giving our fire resources a chance in some cases to prevent the fire. This is a hard narrative, guys. I think you understand this. This is a hard narrative when we say you're reducing your risk to have your structure, your property, or your life's investment reduced from being impacted by wildfire, but not eliminating it. And I have the same issue when trying to talk with fire service professionals, because we're like, there's risk or there's no risk. We like that binary choice, yes or no. And the same conversation you had as a fire chief about fall prevention or fall risk reduction programs in your community. The chief, we're never going to solve the fall problem. Probably not. But if we reduced it by 10%, like let's put a number on how many falls we run or how many people are falling in a community. And if you take that down by 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, I don't know how many calls everybody has, but a 10% reduction is very impactful to your organization and to those people who are falling. 20% even better, 30%. But firefighters sometimes will just say, well, the program's a failure. Like we tried to do fall reduction. We reduced it by 10, but I went on a fall yesterday. So it's not working. Of course it's working, right? But it's not elimination. And that's a hard thing because we do want to eliminate the risk, but let's be honest, like we probably won't be able to eliminate risk outright. How do we lower this, right? And that's this entire effort that's going in between our risk industries like insurance, which is a huge conversation right now, as it should be. Mm-hmm. In fact, my experience has highlighted this problem more so than anything fire professionals have probably been able to do. Because when a homeowner is told by their by their insurance, they're not going to have insurance or the rate has gone up, although the conversation went from increasing fire insurance rates to availability of insurance overnight. Because it was like, well, this is getting really expensive to, I can't even get insurance. Mm-hmm. We have to do something. Like, I think it put a very important spotlight on risk. And how do we now collaborate between that industry? And they've been great. The insurance industry has been great at coming to the table saying, we want to be part of this solution too. Yeah. So kind of back to that whole stakeholder collaboration and building around a one voice message. That's when you take your one voice and go share it with these other industries that are raising their hand saying, we want to be part of the solution too.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you described, we see it in Camp Fire, in your Mayday Fire. You see it in Lahaina, New York City. The unprecedented is sort of becoming the precedent, and we've got to have both unusual and collective solutions to get through this. And whether you're a boots on the ground firefighter or chief who's walking into a new organization or insurance or business owner, you expect to have a collaborative solution to this now precedented event. It's a challenge. Kevin, did you have something before I? Yeah,
this is kind of maybe could open up a whole other rabbit hole, but you did touch a little bit into some of the new technologies a little bit, but one that I'm personally very intrigued by with how can we do more with less and continue to try and, I heard that in the military perspective, like trying to create an unfair advantage for us to where we have the upper hand. But how are we using satellites and how are we using for early detection for these different satellites to me that almost in a sense are kind of like drones in the sense they're carrying payloads. And with these payloads, you have different lasers and sensors and cameras that allow you to see stuff. And then with that information, you can then make better decisions for fireground operations. What are you seeing from a satellite perspective? And how do you see the role of satellite imagery and satellite technology within the continue to assist all fire service, but obviously with the leaning into all things wildland?
Bob, we're expecting you to be a satellite expert now too. So you're going to have big shoes.
Not a satellite expert. I think that's a great framing of that question. And here's where I see the advantage of that technology and satellites in particular is we have to improve the predictive analysis of the impact of fire. Because if we have a stronger confidence in the modeling and the information that we have, because you actually said it best, it's to inform decision making. We have a history of an industry where we just sort of use a lot of intuition, a lot of fire commanders who've done a remarkable job. And I say this, and sometimes people hear like, you don't get it. Like, I've got 25 years of experience, so on and so forth. No, I do get it, because you're also the same person who's telling me is not like any fire I've seen before. So like all your experience, which is informing your decision making, with expert intuition, I value that, is you're seeing conditions that are unusual to you, which means you're taking more risk. You have less certainty in the decision of what you're making in terms of how to impact that fire. So I think the value, what I'm getting at here is the value to that satellites can provide is giving us stronger confidence in what is today really uncertain about progression of a fire. And why that's important is because fires are going to need to burn. Like, there are going to be fires. The fires need to be managed, right? And not just extinguished. And this is a narrative that's emerging in leaders in this space that are coming around saying, there's good fire and there's bad fire. And we have to be able to know the difference. And a lot of that is determined by its intensity, the intensity of that fire. If you've heard Chief Dargan speak to this, Kate Dargan, who's an extraordinary leader in this space. I mean, I just latch onto every word she ever says because she's just got a perfect lens on this intersection between the wildfire problem and the technology that is not only available today, but what do we need to create and to include some of this satellite work to the future. So I think as we build confidence around what this technology provides, our commanders that are on the ground can make determinations about how to be efficient with the scarce resources that we have to manage said intensity of the fire, in which case we can allow those that we need as a natural part of our ecosystem to continue, but those that threaten structures and lives in our community, those would be managed certainly more aggressively. But with that is a change in mentality in society, our social acceptance around fire. Like the fire department's not putting out that fire, type of thing. And more importantly, around the wildfire conversation is the impact of the smoke. Let's be honest. And the smoke has made wildfire a salient issue with our leaders, and back to that federal politics conversation, because Canadian fires had smoke pushing into New York, Washington, D.C. And now you have a lot of folks who are really concerned about wildfire. Well, and that's an amazing focusing event. Like, let's take advantage of this opportunity that people are paying attention to it. We choke on smoke out west every summer. I mean, we're choking on it all summer. A couple weeks of smoke in DC, and all of a sudden there's conversations that are going on around the table. I'm excited that we're able to capitalize on that. Not that there's, not excited about these circumstances. That sounded really, can we edit that out? I think you get the point, right? Yeah. The point is that those that need to be paying attention start to pay attention to it. So back to the question about satellites and that technology is it's getting faster and better at better data that we can use, that we can process to inform decision-making with more confidence in what its predictability is. And that's how I see satellites being immensely useful. How do we will have scarce resources to this problem in perpetuity. How do we navigate those scarce resources in a way that's optimally efficient? We need the data. We need the technology that's going to inform that for sure.
What a pathway, man. You started with a smoke-chasing paramedic in Las Vegas. Now we're talking about satellites and how it's affecting national
That's
level,
right?
You talked about the Jackson County chair, whoever was on your interview committee, the county administrator being proud. I think there's a lot of us are proud watching your path up.
Thank you.
There's a ton to be proud about. I'm wondering what in your career makes you the most proud?
Wow. I've been so blessed. It's been such an amazing career. I've loved every job that I've had a chance to do. Again, the fire service, I really loved being a paramedic. You got to make such an impact. I loved being the fire chief. You got a chance to develop programs and produce opportunities for safer work environment for firefighters. There's some of the in-between, not so much, the line supervisor and those positions. The supervisory position's a little bit less exciting because you're dealing with some of the personnel issues. But the things that you can impact communities and bring voice. So I think the question, what am I most, I've just had a blessed career. It's, I'm still in the middle of it too, which is super exciting too. Such a blessed career is bringing voice to those who otherwise don't have a space to be able to communicate, to advocate on behalf of communities in an area that I have some expertise in, that I can help bring that voice to places that matter. Like, that's what I've been most proud of, and tried to find myself in spaces to help lead that charge, is to challenge the status quo and to work in collaborative environments. And this is not a win at all costs type of environment. Some people don't do well in policy spaces because it's about, like, in fire, we want to solve the problem now. I said, throw that ladder to that building. And if the ladder isn't on that building in 5 minutes, we're knocking tables saying what happened. And that isn't just how the world works with our ability to move at the pace that incident commanders are. We train firefighters to think. A lot of these take a long time. A lot of them have low probability of success, but it's worth the effort. When communicating with decision makers and policymakers who largely don't have experience across the broad spectrum of decisions they have to make, you rely on people who bring expertise. Sometimes those are, a lobbying industry, but within government, it's bringing technical expertise when asked. And it's about informing decision makers of the result of their decision. This is the impact. This is what we project the impact of that decision to be. I'm not here to persuade you or convince you that your decision is wrong. It's just to inform you of the impact of what that decision is. At the end of the day, you were elected by your leaders or by your community to represent their interests. I just want you to understand this is the impact. And so I've been so blessed to find myself in rooms to try to build collaborations around, informing the impacts, the effects of those types of decisions. So I think, at the end of the day, what am I most proud of? It's being able to carry that voice, to listen to the workforce, to listen to the communities, to understand risk, to study and read and understand it, and be able to communicate that in broad environments to help keep people informed around these problems.
That's pretty cool, man. You just explained to us the heroism of policy,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Bob Horton, Branch Chief, Wildfire and Policy, U.S. Fire Administration. I think I got it right again.
You did.
We're very pleased and happy to have had you here. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me, and thank you for elevating the conversation around wildfire and wildfire risk reduction.
We will watch you as you go.
All right.
Okay.
One voice.
Cheers.
Indeed. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
We are certain you enjoyed hearing from those who are doing great things in the wildland-urban interface, and hope maybe you even learned a little something new. If you have a story to share, please reach out to us. In the meantime, we thank you for listening to Wildfire Chronicles: Heroism Beyond the Flames. We'll see you next time.